looked at the mythological or symbolic significance of it until I and my co-author on my book, Freedom's Gate, Dr. Mark Gray, came along and started working on this. It was funny because I met Dr. Gray. I was giving a presentation near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where Dr. Gray lives, and I was talking about this painting. I said, look, you got Washington on the rainbow. He's surrounded by these angelic beings and these pagan deities, which we can get to in a moment. But more importantly, Washington is surrounded by 72 stars and in a perfect circle. And I said, I prefer to call that gate of stars a stargate. And Dr. Gray got all excited. He had been to my presentations before, and the next thing I know, we start working together because he's like, are you saying the United States Capitol is a stargate? And what I'm saying is that the United States Capitol, the dome of the U.S. Capitol, encodes Stargate metaphysics. It tells how to transform ourselves into star beings or to liberate ourselves through the spiritual alchemical process. And I can say that because what we discovered in this painting was that Brumidi, this master painter who came from the Vatican, who was actually exiled by the Vatican, came to the United States Capitol armed with what we think of as all of the alchemical secrets known to Brumidi's great inspiration, Raphael, as well as Michelangelo. He comes and he starts painting in this dome. He paints Washington as a deified being, and as I show in my presentations and in the book Freedom's Gate, when Washington is portrayed on a rainbow, that's exactly how the resurrected Jesus is portrayed in Christian art. Once he goes through this gateway we've been talking about, he's in the ascended realms, and he too is shown sitting on a rainbow. Furthermore, when the Tibetans talk about their lamas who have achieved the ultimate enlightenment, the ultimate awakening, they call that the great perfection, and they show those lamas, the perfected ones, either on a rainbow, in a rainbow, or surrounded by rainbow light, and they call this perfected body the rainbow body. And so we connected all three of those traditions, the Christian, the Tibetan, and the early American idea of Washington on the rainbow, and said it's all telling the same story. If we're going to go through this Stargate, we've got to transform or perfect ourselves. And remember, that's something Obama was talking about back in Oslo. So when we're looking at this painting, what Dr. Gray and I discovered and pointed out for the first time since 1865 was that the 5 pagan gods that surround George Washington are Mercury, Hephaestus, the god of smithcraft and alchemy, Ceres, the goddess of earth, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and the goddess of war, and Poseidon, the god of water. Those 5 pagan gods are the 5 gods that the Vatican had spent 1,600 years trying to get rid of. They're also the 5 symbols of earth, air, fire, water, and space-time, the 5 elements of alchemy. This painting is like, we think of it as the ultimate alchemical icon. It tells us how to transform ourselves, how to go through that gateway. And so in my presentations and in my work throughout 2008 and early 2009, I had been saying, the U.S. Capitol is a model for a Stargate. It's a portal. The painting, the apotheosis of George Washington, is the key to higher consciousness. Furthermore, when you're in the dome of the Capitol, domes are symbolic of the human head, because the word dome is slang for head. So when you're in the U.S. Capitol dome, you're inside your head. And so when we're looking up through this gate of 72 stars, a very important number to Graham Hancock and others. It's a processional number. It talks about the 26,000-year cosmic cycle. When you're looking through that gate of stars into the heavenly realms, you're actually looking up through a hole in your head, a hole in the sky. The Stargate we're looking for is in our consciousness. And we're modeling this. We're learning how to activate our dome. And specifically, we're learning how to activate the pineal gland through this process to get it to release those secretions that contain the secrets that transmute us into the rainbow body. And I'm saying, and what I did is I actually invited people. I said, come to Washington, D.C. with me. Let's lay on our backs together. Let's look up through this stargate, perceive Washington in the heavenly realms, and recognize we too can perfect ourselves and transform into these star beings. Well, what happens is in September of 2009, Dan Brown's new book, The Lost Symbol, comes out. What does Dan Brown say? Well, he says there's a lost symbol and a lost portal in the United States Capitol. It's a stargate. The key to higher consciousness is in the apotheosis of George Washington. And at the end of the book, he has Robert Langdon go into the Capitol, lay on his back, and say the apotheosis is a key to higher consciousness. And he actually has him hallucinate as he's looking into this painting, and Langdon now sees that painting open into the stars. He says the pineal gland is the key to activating this higher consciousness. And the way Dr. Gray and I feel about it is that we're living embodiments of what Dan Brown wrote about in that book, because Brown said there is a consciousness, a higher consciousness that flows through the imagery in the United States Capitol. And it is that higher consciousness that if we can tap into it, if millions of people around the world can tap into the consciousness that is there, in the apotheosis of George Washington, we can change the world. And Dr. Gray and I feel like, yes, that's true. In fact, we're living embodiments of it, Dan, and our work was published long before yours, which proves that that consciousness is real, and we tapped into it as well. And then Lord Monckton comes out and says, the apotheosis is at hand. And I'm just sitting here going, until a year ago, nobody ever heard of that word apotheosis.
That is weird, huh?
Now all of a sudden, millions of Dan Brown readers are keying in on that word. You got this Lord Monckton talking about it, talking about world government. And I'm saying that the key to apotheosis is that we're talking about how to transform ourselves before going through a stargate. And one opens over Norway, just out of the blue. Happens to be over this conference Lord Monckton had been talking about. So go figure.
What do you think about, are they trying to portray George Washington as the new kind of messiah in that sense, of the new Atlantis, or is he more of a symbol here? What do you think?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't have ultimately a final answer on it. This began immediately after his death. And in the book Freedom's Gate, I collected all of the images I could find, and I've got 4 or 5 of them that are just astonishing, that show the ascension or apotheosis of George Washington. There were several of these paintings that were done showing him being lifted into the heavens by angels going through an open sun gate. And as you know, in Egyptian symbolism, the ancient Egyptians viewed our sun, our star, as a tunnel. It was the sun tunnel, the star tunnel, or what today we call a star gate. And this is why in Christian art you'll see Jesus in front of the sun, because the sun is the way and the truth and the light. The way to heaven is through the sun, the S-U-N. And so they've got Washington here as this resurrected being sitting in front of this open sun tunnel or stargate. And this is all, to me, stargate metaphysics. Did Washington ascend? I can't say that for sure. Are we witnessing over the course of the past couple hundred years the elevation, the apotheosis of Washington into a deity? Yes, we did, up until about 1865 or so, when Brumidi painted the apotheosis in the dome. It was widely believed, widely thought that Washington had achieved this elevated status. Today, we think that's insane. There's no way we can even believe Washington is a Christ-like being. But think about how the whole thing played out in the Christian story. I mean, for the first 150 years after Jesus' birth, they weren't sure who he was. It wasn't until a couple, 300 years after his death that all of a sudden the creed was put together, that this is who Jesus was in terms of him being the Son of God, the only Son of God, and resurrected, and all of this. And so maybe we're witnessing something like that happening with Washington. It's yet to be seen.